Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight I want to welcome Davy Gallagher and Bicyclelegs to the program. We are going to take a look at Neil Young's 1983 album, Trans. So without any further ado, let's get this one started. Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and I want to welcome Davy Gallagher and Bicyclelegs here tonight. These two gentlemen are here because we are going to look at Neil Young's 1983 album, Trans. This is one of those Neil Young albums that, well, not everybody's into. There you go. There's the prop. Beautiful, beautiful. It's a bit, shall we say, experimental, I would say, on Neil's behalf. But Neil does Neil the way Neil wants to do Neil. And so Neil, this is what he was into at the time. I'm not going to give my review at gentlemen, because we're going to go around, and I guess I'll start out with, I don't know, Davey, you want to start out tonight, or Bicyclelegs, either one?
You happy with that?
All right.
Yeah. So a little bit of background on the album itself. Came from a number of different projects. So Neil originally intended it to be the soundtrack for his film Human Highway, as found on Blu-ray here now, so you can get that officially on the Blue, with Russ Tamblyn, Devo most notably perhaps, Dennis Hopper, Charlotte Stewart, Neil looking rather bizarre up there in the corner. There's Russ Tamblyn.
Almost, that picture just reminds me of a David Lynch film.
Well, it's got Dean Stockwell in it. Right. It's got Russ Tamblyn, so may as well be. Yeah, they're both
might as well be.
Yeah. So it was intended originally to be the soundtrack for that. That fell through. And then Neil had a completely separate project called Islands in the Sun. Yeah, Island in the Sun. Yeah. Which was going to be the first on the Geffen calendar. So his last thing for Reprise was supposed to be whatever the soundtrack would be for this film, Human Highway, and then his first was going to be this Islands in the I always want to say Islands in the Stream. It must be a Dolly Parton, Kenny Rogers thing.
I always keep thinking
Islands in the Sun. I have to remind myself, Island in the Sun, Wilson by my father.
Isn't that a Weezer song too? I don't know. Maybe.
Probably. God it knows. May be, because I would have ignored it if it was. And post 95. It's not fair, but 97 I dropped Weezer. So we've got these disparate projects. He turns in this Islands in the Sun, and David Geffen says, in a decision that he would come to regret, he says, I like it, it's nice, it's breezy, it's poppy. I think you can do better. Why don't you go away and come back with something a bit different? Neil went away and came back with something quite a bit different. He came back with Trans. So in the interim, he'd been his son Ben was coming of age, and Ben was born with extreme cerebral palsy, and to this day he can't talk. And Neil was going through extensive therapy with him and Peggy, his then wife, about how to look after a child that was going to need so much care and whatnot, but also recognizing that the child still can communicate, it's just they can't communicate in a fashion that we know. So Neil wanted to make an album that would essentially echo that would take communication as a theme and the lack of communication. So we know that something's being said, but we just don't know what it is. It's almost like before the Rosetta Stone, nobody knew how to translate hieroglyphics. So this is essentially his love letter, if you will, to his son in terms of communication. And then he would also throw in some other things. There's definitely dystopian themes in a few tracks as well. And oddly, there are still 3 tracks from the Islands in the Sun sessions. They're not hard to spot. They're the only 3 tracks that don't have the vocoder and the synclavinet, I want to say.
The synclavier.
Yeah, it's the only track, the only 3 tracks that don't have that on it. And interestingly, they're pretty well spaced out too, because Little Thing Called Love is track 1, and I bet you people putting on that first track would have thought, hey, this is a nice laid back Neil Young kind of country rocker. Like, hey, this is good.
Goes into track 2. Get ready, kids.
So yeah, so we get, which is, it's interesting because it's a great little track. There's some lovely slide playing on it from Neil's Lofgren. And there's, if you notice underneath it, the acoustic riff is exactly Harvest Moon from 10 years later. It's the dun 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 dun. Dun. Wow, he had that sitting for 10 years, buried in the mix on a Little Thing Called Love. And then, as you mentioned, we go into Computer Age straight away. And now, what a vault face, what a turnaround. And the album cover kind of sums it up, that the album is going in 2 directions, isn't it? So on one side, you've got the very digital side, which is all spacey, all very sharp objects, all digital looking, like Tron or something, doesn't it? Yeah. And then if you cover that side up entirely, that could be an old Neil Young album. It's The Forest, it's an old car, it's a hitchhiker. So it really is a game of 2 halves. And I think the album cover is very clever in telling you that, actually. I think it's...
I love the album cover.
Yeah, I think it's terrific.
Yeah, it's great.
In visual storytelling, here's exactly what's going to happen on this album. It's almost, old ways, new ways. And I've always loved that picture at the back as well, with the kind of literally the artificial heart, which was, gorgeous. Just terrific stuff. The actual album itself, I think, has a wonderful flow to it, despite any issues with individual songs. People can say that, I don't like the synth heavy nature of it, and that's always going to be subjective. But I think now that we've gone through 15 years of a synth revival, I think that this is actually dated very well. It used to figure a lot lower in Neil Young ranking lists than it does these days. Not that it ever comes to the top, but it tends to be in the middle now, which never used to. It was always kind of the black sheep, and sometimes lazily, because all of the Geffens were usually just thrown in as the bottom pretty much. We're in Control, to me, is where you can hear the most obvious, right? He's not just come up with this out of the ether. He's not just said, I'll discover a new sound. He's clearly also been listening to other things. So Devo are in the movie, so we know they're in the influences. Yeah. Kraftwerk are all over We're in Control. There's no two ways about it.
But think about Computer Age. The Kraftwerk album, there's a lot of Kraftwerk on that track. I mean, there's Kraftwerk all over this. He must have been just so influenced by Kraftwerk.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say there's more in tracks like We're in Control because there's a coldness to it. And the vocals that you do hear, it's very much We Are in Control. It's a roboticness that you get more with Kraftwerk. We're in Control when he's spitting that out, which isn't in a track like Computer Age. So even though, and we'll come to just, in fact, the next track I'll just run into, because I don't think we need to dissect them the way we do some records.
No, we don't have to.
But the next track is Transformer Man, and that's a perfect illustration of how you can do this synth vocoder heavy approach, but still have a tremendous amount of heart and melody as well, because although it is absolutely drenched in all the most up-to-date technology, it's still very affecting. It's still very melodic. I mean, you can hum it, you can go
right.
So it's got as much of a melody as any Neil Young guitar-led track would have. Computer Cowboy is aka Sky Crusher, which you never hear that. It's only ever just listed as Computer Cowboy on articles and things, but yeah, on the actual album it says aka Sky Crusher, which that's maybe the best guitar-led track on the album, which where you can clearly hear the guitars. Still not terribly clear, but you can hear it most. I think you can hear where it's easier to turn that into a Crazy Horse-like track than some of the other tracks. I think that would be one of the easier ones to do live, for example. And we'll come to that in a moment as well. Hold On to Your Love is the second of the tracks that came back from, what do you call it?
Islands in the Stream.
Islands in the Stream, the Dolly Parton, Neil Young, Kenny Rogers album that they all did together. No. So Islands in the Sun. and that actually is a bit syrupy for me. That one, I think that might be the letdown. And Neil's releasing that album, Islands in this, because of course he is. He's
Of
releasing.
course.
It's going to be on Archives Volume either 3 or 4, depending on where Volume 3 ends. He's changed the name of it. It's now going to be called Johnny's Island. But yeah, so a little thing called Love and Hold On to Your Love. That's where they come from. But there's overdubs on that even, because there's since been added on top of Hold On to Your Love, which weren't on the original sessions. The guys from Crazy Horse complained because they actually played on quite a lot of this that were then just completely taken off and reworked with the new vocals and whatnot. And it's a fascinating band because it's Neil doing a journey through the past. I mean, you've got Bruce Palmer coming back all the way from Buffalo Springfield, and you've got Neil's coming back from after the Gold Rush, who was kind of a member of Crazy Horse in the early days, but kind of not, and is again now.
Well, I'm just curious, since you mentioned Bruce Palmer, how did Bruce get involved in this project? Do you know? Does anybody know?
They've always been in reasonable contact.
Okay. Well, yeah, I know they were friends and stuff.
I should say,
I'm just
yeah,
curious because I don't remember Bruce being on anything prior to this.
It wasn't. And Bruce has since left us. We got the Springfield reunion, unfortunately, after he passed, and that only lasted a few days before Neil walked out. How unlike him, eh? But then you get my favorite track in the album, which is Sample and Hold.
A classic.
Which we were talking just before we came on about how the guitars on this that you can hear are super crunchy, super heavy, distortion beyond belief. If you have them on and your subwoofer and whatnot aren't set up correctly, there's a good chance you will blow your speakers. The bottom end will just completely rip them to shreds. It is unreal. Niels Lofgren and Neil Young obviously have this interplay that's just, it's as if they're trying to, it's like that grungy sound that you would get later in the 80s with Ragged Glory, or he also kind of had on Hey Hey My or something. But it's that, but through this electronic filter, which just gives it, whoa, it's almost scary.
You mentioned that the interaction between Nils and Neil, if you watch that Live in Berlin concert, you can see that in full action on there. They're just going back and forth, playing licks. Bruce Palmer's there playing bass. I don't know if did that ever come out like on DVD or Blu-ray or anything?
What do you mean? Do you mean this one?
Yes, I'd love to get one of those.
Yes. So I was coming on to that, but yeah, I will circle around to it in a second. So the obvious answer is yes, it is on DVD because
okay, it is Neil. So
yeah, not just because I'm holding it in my hand, although I suppose it could be a bit like theoretically. Yeah, Sample and Hold, and one thing to mention here is. And here's your Japanese version with your obi strip, and only the fanciest will do.
Does the Japanese one different than the one that came out in Europe?
No, it's just the one that I happened to pick up. It wasn't more expensive or anything. I got it at a record fair, and I owned the vinyl, and this was only £7 or something. So it was like, why not just get the Japanese one? Here's a question for you, though. I've always wondered this. So we know that they always have an obi strip on a Japanese release. Why do the insert sheets they always have for lyrics? Why are they always plain black and white with no pictures? Always, every single time.
I don't know.
I've never figured out the reason for that.
I have no idea.
They always are plain black and white, no pictures.
And it's usually really bad pictures too. If there's any kind of, the only thing that they'll be there would be just like some text that doesn't really even go along with the album at all.
So that's apropos of nothing really, apart from the fact that it popped into my mind. But if anyone knows the answer to that, put it
down in the. Yeah, I'd like to know.
I have maybe 50 Japanese CDs and probably about that again on LP, and it's always just black and white text. I've never found out the reason why there's no artwork to it at all, or no color. But the difference between this and this isn't just because it's Japanese. The version of Sample and Hold on CD, 4 minutes longer than the one on vinyl. Always has been, even in the early CD pressings. And to be honest, it's worth it, because to me, that's your big epic track of this album. it's the most mission statement. It's very much this is what this project is meant to do. And boy, it's a workout and a half. I absolutely adore it. Mr. Soul is such a weird one. It's the second time he's done this with Mr. Soul to revisit it. He also did it on the soundtrack to Journey Through the Past, where he put a really scuzzy version on that. So that's a song that he kind of revisits just to kind of deconstruct it almost. So him and Bruce Palmer obviously going back to their earlier days. It was only 15 years, but it must have felt like a lifetime. And it's a reasonably straight version of Mr. Soul vocally. I mean, there's nothing particularly different about anything in the playing or anything. It's just the actual production arrangements and the choice in playing. But Neil's singing it very similar. I mean, all the inflections are exactly the same.
Yeah.
So there's nothing deconstructionist about the track itself. It's almost an exercise in saying you can do this with any song, this kind of treatment that the album gets. It's not just a case of having to come up with new stuff. You can do this with existing material. And then the end track is Like an Inca. That also is much longer on the CD than it was on the vinyl. I think it's about 2.5 minutes in this case.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite, but it's certainly about 2 minutes. And that's Like an Inca is very much, again, that's from Island in the Sun. And that's very much your classic Neil Young kind of mystical closer, where a bit like Cortez, the Killer, only not as aggressive. Obviously, this is a much more subdued track musically, but it explores the themes that he's revisited about civilizations decaying, and again, it's all in Cortez the Killer. So I mean, he's gone through that. He would go back to On Life, also in the Geffen years. So a theme he likes to revisit is that kind of South American imperialization that happened a few centuries earlier. And Like an Inca to me actually sounds better on the record. I think it does go on a bit too long at 9 minutes on CD. I think that's one that could be cut down. And indeed was for the vinyl, or rather extended for the CD, I should say. But the sound of it's great. I love the production of it. I mean, it's got a bit of a Steely Dan Do It Again vibe to it. Or even the same year, Crosby, Stills, Nash, Turn Your Back on Love. It's got that kind of vibe to it. So it's not too far out of the wheelhouse that you'd kind of expect from a rock pop star of this era. There's nothing too strange, too weird about it, apart from the length. I'd imagine that if it was CSN, it wouldn't be 9 minutes. If it was Steely Dan, it wouldn't be 9 minutes. So if you want to get an impression of what the scrapped project would be, Like an Inca, Hold On to Your Love, and Little Thing Called Love, or where you find that. And it's a strange beast because they're so different from the rest of the album, the new stuff that's on the project. So different that it is very much, as the album cover implies, like two different directions entirely.
But you know what? Well, I was going to say, Davey, real quick. There you go. I was going to say real quick, but even though there are two different, I'm going to say two different versions of Neil on this, the album still has a tonality that matches throughout the whole project.
Yes, and I think that's done very carefully because of the overdubs, which adding a bit of synth on top just helps it feel a bit more of a piece. If there was, say, a completely acoustic track on here, it would sound totally, unless you used it as maybe the closer as a real contrast or something. But I'd love to have seen the live reaction of people putting this on this turntable and hearing the first track and then hearing Computer Age. I'd love to. That's what I want to know, is the first, because you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, so everybody knows what this album's like now. What was the reaction from somebody who didn't have any idea, there was no internet, what the new Neil Young sounded like? Heard the first track and thought,
oh, that's a nice little song.
Yeah, this is a kind of country rocker. I like this. Neil's done this kind of stuff before, and then boom, Computer Age.
Drum machine. Boom, boom.
Yeah. And you mentioned obviously the Berlin concert. I mean, here it is. It is an absolute belt. It's only an hour long. It's never been expanded. Cinnamon Girl, Computer Age, Little Thing Called Love, Old Man, Needle and Damage Done, Gold Rush, Transformer Man, Sample and Hold, Hey Hey My, and a song called After Berlin. And it's the only concert that song's ever been played at. He's never played it since, and it's never been on an album. So there's a completely unique Neil Young song on this live VHS, Laserdisc, or DVD, depending on what you have. The band on it, as we mentioned, you've still got Bruce. You have Neil Lofgren, and you have Ben Keith as well, who was in the Stray Gators with Neil. So you've got three very different generations of Neil. You've got the Crazy Horse connection with Ralph Molina and kind of Nils. You've got the Stray Gators with Ben Keith, who did Harvest and Time Fades Away. And then you've got Bruce Palmer from the Springfields. And you've also got Joe Lala on percussion. And he was the drummer, and I think just kind of second percussionist on the CSNY 74 tour. So you've got 4 different distinct eras of Neil Young's career being represented just in the band here, which is quite bizarre. It's like a super group of his own guys, if you like. And this is sensational. The version of Like a Hurricane on here, Nils and Neil, it's always weird saying their names back to back. Nils and Neil doing their interplay, it's a bit like watching stills, and Neil,
it is.
They are trying to one up each other in a very like, oh really, that was your solo, what's this, you know, and it never to the detriment of the song. It never becomes wanky. It always just makes you go, oh, that's brilliant. Come on, what have you got to show us? All right, you've got it too. What have you got next? It's brilliant.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And this does show you how odd it is to put some tracks next to it, because we do get a solo acoustic Needle and the Damage done right next to Transformer Man and thing. You know?
I love that though.
It is.
See, I haven't seen that in years. I originally saw it when I was, God, I don't know. It must have been, they showed it. There was a show on USA Network called Night Flight, and they used to show that. And they used to show Rust Never Sleeps, which of course is absolutely incredible. But I remember watching that Berlin concert and just going, wow.
Yeah.
Just amazing.
And this is a misnomer. The cover is ridiculous because Neil, as anybody who's watched it knows, Neil has very short hair in it.
Right.
And he comes out in a lime green jacket, and he's got a black shirt with a skinny tie. He's so new wave, it's not real. He's possibly new wave.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
So you look at that and it's like they're trying to sell you on, hey, no, it's just like Neil Young, you know, the old rocker, probably wearing a plaid shirt, something like that. Couldn't be further from that at all. Very much the Neil Young of this period, with the new wave look going on, and the much shorter hair, very short hair, probably shortest he ever had it. So this is essential for any Neil Young fan.
But that concert, you know, Bruce Palmer's playing bass, and it's nice to see Bruce back out playing. Yeah, especially with Neil, you know.
Yeah,
I loved it. It's worth it.
I wish that he could have been around for the Springfield reunion. Here's a couple of singles from the project. So there's a thing called Love on 7-inch, with We're in Control on the B-side.
Yeah, I've never seen any 7 inches for that.
Here's a 12-inch and annoyingly it's a promo, and the idiot tried to cover up the gold stamp bit. Why would you do that on your promo? So look, kind of covered it up. So it's,
what's up with that?
I know, what an idiot. So 12-inch promo of Sample and Hold, the dance remix.
Oh my god, I'd love to hear that.
And were you ready for this? Yeah. Side 2 gives you the single version of Sample and Hold, which is shorter again. So you've got 3 different versions of Sample and Hold. Sorry, 4, because you've got the dance remix, the single version, and the 2 different length album versions depending on CD or vinyl. So that's 4 versions of Sample and Hold. But the first track on side 2, you ready?
Yeah.
Dance remix of Mr. Soul. No joke. So
I'm gonna have to track one of those down.
You need to, and you'll get it cheap, because this stuff just did not sell.
Is that a European? Is that domestic? Is that a US?
Yeah, let's see. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is the UK version.
Is it?
Yeah, it's the UK version.
I've never seen one.
Yeah,
but I'm gonna have to get one now.
Just with the Geffen logos and whatnot. But how odd! to do a dance remix of Mr. Soul. I mean, you ever listened to that by the Springfield and said, if only that had a beat to it, you could go.
I did find this is going off on a tangent, but I did find an original vinyl pressing of Mr. Soul that's in mono, and it's got that different guitar part in it.
Yes.
I found an original pressing 45 of that. It's absolutely it is the version of it as far as I'm concerned. Mono 45 version of Mr. Soul.
The first two albums by the Springfield, the mono version is the way to go. And I was really glad when they did the little CD box set of albums that they included the vinyl and stereo, the mono and stereo versions. I thought that was decent of them on a budget box set. They didn't need two. They could have just cheaped out and given you 3 discs, but they gave you 5 instead, which was pretty cool. But overall, I think it's a fascinating album. We know what would happen next because Mr. Geffen wasn't terribly happy and said, okay.
He should have left everything well enough alone. He should have said, okay,
if he'd left it alone, he would have had maybe not a great, but certainly.
Well, who said that? I don't know how this whole Geffen thing. So Neil was going through a period where he's very experimental, and he was pissed off too. But all that Geffen material, I think's fine. I think people just get all worked up about it, or I don't know.
Well, I mean, he had the word with him. Geffen did, where he said, "I want you to make sure the next one's a rock album," and Neil said, "I'll give you a rock album." And as we know,
you don't put baby in the corner.
It turns into I'll give you a rock album, a rockabilly album, and we get
But it's great too.
So he ends up, as I'm sure we'll go into, all sorts of legalities. Whereas if David Geffen had just left well enough alone, he would have had a recognizable, straightforward, straight ahead Neil Young. Islands in the Sun, released in 1982 instead of 83, and but he had to put his foot down, and he was paying Neil $1 million downside on these records. Every album he produced, $1 million downside. So a lot to recover. But as you say, if anybody was paying attention to the stuff that Neil had just done, it's not that. I mean, it's different, but Reactor is a very unusual rock album as well. That's not a very accessible.
And look at Rust Never Sleeps. You can kind of, see sedan delivery and all that. There's hints at things that are coming. New wave aspects. Yeah, there's new wave aspects in his music.
Yeah, especially in sedan delivery, there is. But
it's interesting you say that about Reactor though, because that was also an album where he was trying to communicate with his son.
Minimal,
but he was trying to do it through songs that were very repetitive.
Yeah, T-Bone and just very not even short lyrics, almost just the title sometimes repeated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they were just.
So for Geffen to have looked at that, and then the album before that would be Hawks and Doves. So to look at those two and think that Neil's somehow producing albums that deserve $1 million downside, I think Geffen was the one that was really at fault, because Neil was already doing these rather strange records. I mean, those are both very unusual albums for different reasons,
Yeah.
Well, Hawks and Doves is a bit of a album in 2 parts as well.
Yeah, it's a bit of a hodgepodge.
Goes back to 1974, and then some of it's more recent stuff.
So was American Stars and Bars. Because a lot of these albums featured stuff from Homegrown and Human Highway projects that were scrapped completely and repurposed. So sometimes you will get a rather odd juxtaposition. But again, that stuff was all out by this point that Geffen made the offer to Neil Young. So I don't understand how you can possibly confirm what Neil Young was doing. I think the phrase was uncommercial and unrecognizable music, as if Neil Young wasn't making Neil Young music, which by default means it must be if he's Neil Young. How can Neil Young not make Neil Young? Whatever he does must therefore be Neil Young music.
Yeah.
That kind of bullshit was all about in the 80s, wasn't it? John Fogerty was also sued for not sounding enough like John Fogerty, and you know,
or he was sounding too much
for sounding too much like John Fogerty.
Well, depending on which lawsuit, because that's the one with Saul Van Zandt, but he also had the one for I and the Zombie.
That's true.
Yeah. So there's two with, in fact, one he only got the rights back to Creedence a few weeks ago for that one you guys are referring to, or a few months ago now, I guess it would be. But yeah, how fascinating in this period that so many rock stars were getting accused of not sounding like themselves. But yeah, to me, it's not a million miles away from what somebody like Paul McCartney was doing with McCartney too. You know, with, coming up.
No, it's not.
You know, coming up, Temporary Secretary. You know, these tracks are very unusual as well, and he didn't get. Well, there was backlash, but there wasn't, you know, an urge to actually get him into court because they were that bad.
Well, there was a lot.
But you know what the difference there is, Davey? I think the difference is that Paul was still with his record company that he'd been with, you know, since the Beatles, as opposed to being, you know, on a new record company where the new record company is looking at this, you know, they're not looking at them as an artist, they're looking at them as a cash cow. So I think that's probably the difference there.
Yeah, I mean, that is ultimately the difference, but I'd say the larger difference is McCartney 2 still sold and had hit singles. If this did, I don't think Geffen would have cared how weird it was. I think that's ultimately the answer.
I'm surprised they even put it out as a 12-inch.
Yeah, I wonder if they did actually over
I'm gonna go look. I'm looking it up.
Because the tour never went outside of Europe. That's why the live recordings from Berlin, it never left Europe, and Neil lost $750,000 on that tour. So yeah, unfortunately, he bit it on that one. But I think the project's a success. It might have been a failure in.
It did come out here in the States, US, Canada, the 12-inch. US, Canada, it came out.
Yeah, and does it mention how much you take off the value if you put a fucking sticker on the promo stamp? What an idiot.
They did not. They don't mention that.
What? Yeah, but overall, the album, if it was deemed a failure at the time, I think it can only be deemed a failure commercially. It can't be deemed an artistic failure. I think retrospectively, it shows that Neil was willing to push boundaries personally and professionally. He was interested in making the very impersonal electronica scene personal to him, and I think it influences a lot of artists as well. So although he's learning from Devo and he's picking up from Kraftwerk, and there's definitely a bit of Talking Heads going on as well, I think he's also given out things that would inspire other artists like Daft Punk and whatnot for years to come. So, you know, I think he becomes a part of the scene, albeit briefly, but I think he becomes an important voice in terms of a mainstream rock star doing this, because he wasn't doing synth pop, he was doing synth rock, which was something quite different for the scene.
Yeah.
So,
well, if you think about it too, this is the person who is blending. Well, Kraftwerk had their thing, all right, but we've now blended. I'm not even sure what you want to even call it. That type of computer-generated music. What do you call Kraftwerk?
But just call it Kraftwerk.
Yeah. I mean, you blend Kraftwerk with rock, and that's what Neil basically did. And he was probably the first one who did that. I don't recall anything like that prior to this.
I think it was certainly I mean, you can hear it on a few tracks. It was certainly, I'd say, for example, the minute that Computer Age hits in, it's probably the first time you can hear rock explicitly meeting electronica so heavily, without just saying I'm doing
electronica. There you go.
So you're not just changing your sound to electronica, you're bringing your whole sound and putting it inside the boundaries of electronica, which is quite different. And Kraftwerk, Devo, all those kind of bands, they started with that kind of sound. So it's a bit different when somebody changes to that kind of sound as well.
Yeah. Well, it's drastic. It's drastic.
Yeah. But I just think, especially with the benefit of having Neil for nearly 60 years now, the idea of anybody having an issue with it just because it's different is nonsense, because that's always been his MO. And when you look at the overview of his career, the minute he has a hit, he runs away a million miles and does something to make sure that this one isn't a hit. You know, it just he's restless. He's the restless poet. You know, he's always looking for what's next, and never less resting his laurels or his laurel canyon, as it may be, depending on what era we're talking. But yeah, I guess we should let Bicycle talk because I've done quite a lot of jibber
Yeah,
jabber.
but for real quick before we jump over to Bicyclelegs, what would you rate this record out of 10? And we'll do an average. That's what we've been doing, so we might as well do it on this one.
I mean, I do think that there's not a dud on the album, but I don't particularly care for Hold On to Your Love.
Yeah, I don't either. I think that song needs a little work.
I think Like an Inca could stay at the LP length or even lose another minute on top of that. So I can't give it perfect. I can't even give it 9. I'd say 8.5.
Okay.
And very happy with that. And yeah, bless Neil, bless David Briggs, his dear departed long-term partner and producer who gave us so many classics over the years, because boy, did they take us on a hell of a journey and still do. So.
Yeah, incredible. All right, Davey, thank you. I appreciate that. Excellent synopsis, as always. Bicycleleg, let's throw it over to you. What's your thoughts on this record?
Okay. Well, I don't know if I'm going to be able to go quite as in depth as Davey did, because that was just incredible.
Well, you know, Davey's like a machine. So,
but this album is very important for me. Well, particularly the single "Little Thing Called Love." And as you showed, I mean, they use that picture on the inner sleeve here as well.
Yeah, I love that picture.
That was also the cover of the single. Little Thing Called Love was the very first Neil Young record I ever bought. I bought it when it came out. I was not quite 12 years old, I think. So I'm showing my age there. But yeah, I bought it as a single, and I remember listening to it, and I was one of these kids who would always flip the record over and listen to the B-side of the single. And the B-side was We Are in Control, and it was like, well, this is different.
Yeah.
So I thought, I'm really sort of, I was instantly fascinated by this guy who could do two very, very different songs and put them on a single. So when I got the album, it was a little while afterwards that I actually got the whole album and listened to it. But yeah, I mean, the first thing about Little Thing Called Love is that the slide guitar and the melody of this song kind of remind me of like a George Harrison song. You know, they do definitely have that kind of George Harrison feel to them, which again really appeals to me because I'm a massive George Harrison solo fan. And this was definitely, you know, this was my entry point into Neil Young. So, I mean, I'm probably coming from a strange area that this album and that single is my entry point into Neil Young.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, you get the complete 180 switch going into Computer Age. I always felt like the first section of this song sounds like sort of 70s Neil Young, just with synthesizers. But then the vocoders come in, and that's where it really sort of, for the traditional Neil Young fans, that's probably where it completely goes off the rails for them. But for me, that's where it really starts getting interesting and fascinating. And then, I don't know if either of you noticed this, but in that song, there's like a melodic section with the vocoders and whatever that sounds like Pachelbel's canon. You know, it has that sort of canon feel to it. And then it's, to me, a really odd blend of a song, but I'm absolutely here for it. I think it's a great song. And then you get We Are in Control, B-side of Little Thing Called Love single. And to me, this is the song that has the most obvious Devo influence on it. And the thing is, like, as Davey mentioned, Devo were in the Human Highway movie. And they were actually pretty influential on Neil. what a lot of people don't know is that Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo gave Neil the title Rust Never Sleeps because he'd seen it on an old sign at a service station or gas station, I guess you'd call it in America. And so he gave Neil that title. And in the movie, they do this absolutely ferocious version of Hey, Hey, My with Neil. But with Boogie Boy, their character.
And he's in the crib,
vocals.
right?
He's in the crib because Boogie Boy is the infantile spirit of de-evolution. And apparently Neil took that version of the song to Crazy Horse and said, this is how I want to do this song. So, you know, Devo are a bigger influence than people think. And the other thing is that, you know, people think Devo, synth pop. Devo started off very much as a punk band. You know, they were very punky and they introduced the synths into that. So it's not dissimilar from the way that Neil is introducing the synths into his rock and roll style, but not creating synth pop. He's creating synth rock, as Davey said earlier. So I don't think the influence from Devo can't be understated, I don't think, especially on this record. But yeah. And then you get Transformer Man, and I think this one does sound more sort of Neil Young with synths and vocoders.
Yeah.
And I think lyrically, this one directly sort of references the concept. I remember Neil said something about how on this album, the vocoder voices were like the doctors and nurses in a hospital, and they were trying to get this baby to push a button. And this song lyrically seems to be the most directly related to that concept. You know, the concept such as it is on this album is a little vague, and a couple of the songs don't really fit in with the concept, I don't think, especially a couple of the ones from the Island in the Sun project. But yeah, I mean, this one probably most lyrically directly relates to to the concept of this album. Then you get Computer Cowboy, aka Sis Crusher, which I think has a much more rock feel, but again with the vocoders to the fore. I feel like the lyric on this song is a perfect blend between sort of Neil Young's country influence stuff and the futuristic concept of the album. There's a real sort of good blend in the lyrics between those two areas where Neil is coming from. I think it's a great song. Really, really like it. Then we get on to side two. Hold On to Your Love. Definitely, as Davey said, this one's from the Island in the Sun project. And you can tell that, although it is still very keyboardy. I don't know if those were overdubs later on or whether they were part of the track.
The keyboards are overdubbed?
Yeah, they were, because they're not on the bootlegs. They're not on the... Yeah.
Because
okay,
it was
well,
that
I
was
haven't gone so far as to get into the bootlegs, so
but that the Islands record was a Crazy Horse record, correct?
Half and half.
Half and half.
So it was going to be Crazy Horse, but you know the way Crazy Horse, technically things like American Stars and Bars is a Crazy Horse, but it's also got very country things from it's not really Crazy Horse sounds. More like that, where it was going to be a very laid back crazy, you know, so certainly not the Crazy Horse of Ragged Glory for that.
Oh, what a great record that is.
Although I noted that there is a lyric in this that I feel fits into the sort of the concept of the album of communication and that sort of thing. And that's the lyric where he sings, is this the way to learn? And I feel like that sort of ties this song into the concept a little better than maybe a couple of the other songs from the Islands in the Sun project. So yeah, I can understand where Davy's coming from, that this one maybe is the least sort of fitting well into the album kind of song. I still quite like it though. Then you have Sample and Hold, and I agree with Davey. This is probably the best song on the album.
Oh God, yes.
To me, it sounds like a Russ Never Sleeps, Crazy Horse type song, but then fed through the trans sensibility of the vocoders and the synclaviers and what have you. And I said, I think this is possibly the best blending of the two styles on the album, and that's what makes this song work so well, is that it has the futuristic concept, it has the futuristic sounds, but this definitely sounds like Neil Young and Crazy Horse as well, and a very sci-fi lyric, which I really, really like. So I would love I don't have this on CD, so I would love to get it on CD and hear the longer version to see how much better it is with the extended version.
Hold off, because Neil has this ongoing series. I mean, he's got about 25 ongoing series of different projects. He's got archives, he's got the performance series, he's got the bootleg series. He's also got the original release series, the ORS.
Yes,
that's the remasters of the actual albums that's ongoing, and he's numbering them. And the last one that came out had like El Dorado and Freedom, that kind of era. And there was a chunk missing, and people said, "Well, where's the missing ones in the middle?" That's the Geffen years. He has now got the rights back to the Geffen years, and is going to be releasing a remastered for the first time entire Geffen years box set.
Oh, cool.
So rather than pick it up now and then think, oh, I wish I'd held out for a year or so.
But that's good news that he got that part of the catalog back. Thank God.
He needed it for archives, or it would be a story untold, really.
So I would love to hear. Well, I think there has to be more to trance than just this. I mean, you know, if there are other tracks on here, I've never heard them. I don't know if anybody, either you two, have heard any other versions of these songs without the, you know, synclavier and without all the vocoder and all that stuff.
Yeah, because obviously the famous one is Transformer Man, because it was done at MTV Unplugged.
Yeah.
And it's him just completely normally just singing Transformer Man, no affectations, no electronics, as the MTV Unplugged part implies.
And
but
as I said earlier, that song probably would work the best for that, because it's the one that most sounds like just a standard Neil Young song, but with vocoders.
Yeah, and there's enough lyrics to it as well, crucially.
Yeah.
But you know, there's a Neil Horse version. There is a Crazy Horse version of Sample and Hold somewhere. You know there is.
Crazy Horse,
where they probably completely rock out on it.
Yeah.
But the Mr. Soul was an odd one for me, because I thought, why is he taking this 1967 Buffalo Springfield song and adding it into this concept? But it works for me. I think it works. I really enjoy it in the context of the album. I'm not sure what it has to do lyrically with most of the rest of the album, though. I thought, for me, some of Neil's best soloing is on this track, though. He plays some absolutely scorching lead guitar.
The guitar sounds like it's in pain.
Yeah, it's great. It's absolutely great. And then the last song is Like an Inca. I said that I like this song. It has a more traditional Neil Young feel, because obviously, again, it comes from the Island in the Sun project. But it does kind of stick out to me, especially as the last track. It just feels a little bit out of place for me in the context of the rest of the album. Still a good song, as I say. Just feels a little out of place. And at 8 minutes and change, maybe he could have cut it down by a minute or two.
10 minutes on the CD. I mean,
yeah, exactly. So
I don't know. Well, what year did this, Davey? What year did this come out on CD? Do you remember?
87, I think.
I mean, it was still in that era. Well, we've got more time. We can fill it up. That's what they were starting to do. So I don't know what the whole idea with it was at that point. But
yeah,
I mean, I'm fine with it being 9 minutes. That's fine. It's all right.
I like this version. The most epic track in terms of length on the album isn't what you expect from a 10-minute Neil Young song. Because you hear a Neil Young 10-minute song, you expect a crazy horse rocker, don't you? You expect
you expect a real raver.
You expect Like a Hurricane. You expect Down by the River. You expect Cowgirl on the Sand. But you don't expect a more laid back affair that does sound like Islands in the Sun. And I think it's interesting. It does go back to those lyrics of the kind of Cortez era lyrics, which is kind of shows his interest in history, which again, as Bicycle says, shows that the album is kind of all over the place and doesn't always tie to terribly constant.
Yeah, the lyric in that one more than any just doesn't tie in.
Which I wonder if how much of that is because Neil at the time was very private about Ben's condition. Didn't talk about it, and he didn't in interviews talk about the influence of that on the album at all. And it took quite a long time for him to kind of talk publicly about it because he didn't want his child to be constantly, in the papers,
in the spotlight. Yeah.
He just wanted it to be a family thing. So I wonder how much of it was him putting people off the scent, whereas if he'd have done a strict concept album, it might have been a bit more obvious. So,
yeah.
I like good point. I like Neil's concept work. I think he's good at Greendale, Living with War, Monsanto Years. I think he's good when it comes to trying to tie things around a theme. But I think here the music is the theme, and sometimes the lack of what he's doing musically is the theme. As is the case on the 3 Islands in the Stream tracks. Because they're just so out of place next to those tracks that it gives you a juxtaposition, which actually I quite like because it gives it a change of pace and a change of, and it tosses a bone to fans who are maybe not sure if they like this new thing,
Well, I like the idea that these tracks are on here, even though it is a bit of a shock, but then the album cover kind of ties it all together. Yeah. So it does kind of make sense. So all these songs can live on this record in harmony to some degree. I mean, well, for the fact that I mentioned before that even though the 3 tracks musically don't match, but sonically they do because they all have that. I can't think of another Neil Young album that quite sounds like this in tonality.
No.
There isn't one. I mean, this record, you could put it on and I could go, that's trans.
Yeah.
Whichever track it is, there's just a certain tonality about it. I like it. I think this record sounds great. The CD that they put out back in the day, of course, all the Neil stuff sounds great, but I think this is fine, a great sounding record, even though I guess they rush mixed it. I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, because he wanted to go out on tour.
He wanted to go out on tour.
Once they went through, and the whole album, of course, was thrown together very quickly because maybe that's why there wasn't more material in that style because they didn't have time to do it.
Yeah,
because Geffen wanted something out for early 80, well, preferably late 82, but he missed the deadline by abandoning that whole album. I mean, Geffen said he could rework that album. He didn't really need him to go back to the drawing board, but Neil just decided, no, if you don't like that, that's the piece.
It pissed him off, probably.
Yeah, especially when that's your first new project with the guy. You'd think you would just indulge him for okay, well let him have this one and see how it goes. But Geffen from the outset didn't give him that benefit of the doubt, which is just not how you start a relationship. But Geffen's been proven more than a few times over the years to be a bit of a prick. So.
It is what it is. So, Bicyclelegs, what would you rate this record?
I think I'd agree with Davey and say an 8.5. It's a really good record. Not quite a classic Neil Young record, but I think it's a much more worthwhile album than a lot of Neil Young fans have given it credit for in the past. And it's really nice to see that it is starting to get a bit of a renaissance, as it were, as far as the critical side of things goes.
Well, sometimes these records need to sit out there in the wild for a while, you know, and after a while, people go back and revisit. And as prolific as Neil is, for God's sakes, a lot of people are going back and checking out these records, you know.
Yeah.
The same thing
And
happened to Old Ways. People said that was, oh, that's nonsense. That's a terrible country album. And that's been cited by so many modern Americana artists, well, modern, but as way back as like Jay Farrar and Jeff Tweedy, and you know, so many artists have cited that as being, no, this is how rock can meet country, but not go too far in any one direction. And it sounds terrific. So, you know, I think the Geffen era just has this reputation because of the backstory sometimes.
Yeah.
That people just assume it must be bad.
I'm just curious, I'm going to throw this out to the panel. Would you rather see this album without the island tracks? Do you think it would have made a stronger record? Or does that bother you that those tracks are on there? Or are you just used to, after all these years, that they're part of it? I mean, it's almost like a failed concept album. I mean, if you could have just taken it that extra step, kind of like the Who Sellout, which, you know, side one's brilliant, but it's kind of a failed concept album. But if they could have just flushed it all out and finished it up, it just absolutely would have been stunning. Same thing with here. If it would have had tracks that all followed, like Sample and Hold, and, you know, We're in Control. I don't know. I just wondered how you guys look.
I wouldn't change it. I mean, apart from just slight preferences over song length and things, I wouldn't change that. I mean, there's nothing I would get rid of entirely. I mean, even the track that I'm not particularly keen on, I'm not saying it's an out and out dud. Just that it's, you know, the lesser of the album. So I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I do quite like the changing it gives you sometimes.
Yeah, I think, well, I don't mind that so much. It's just a bit jarring to go from track one to track two. But hey, whatever. It's the 80s, man.
I love that. I love the fact that you get a little thing called Love and then it goes into Computer Age. It's like, it's almost like a sucker punch, you know? It's like, you think you know what you're getting, but you don't.
A little thing called Love.
I rather like that sort of misdirection, as it were.
Yeah, and it's so easy to get into a little thing called Love. I mean, it's so poppy. I mean, it could be on Comes a Time or something, you know. It's so easy.
Definitely, yes.
So easy to get into that, you know, with the chorus. That's what love can do, 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 do. You know, it's just got a lovely little melody, and then all of a sudden you're in Computer Age. There's no way that it was by accident. Neil doesn't do many things by accident. Sometimes when accidents occur, he lets them just happen, you know, but he's careful about things like planning the track listing and how to organize and structure an album. So I'm sure that was in his mind as well, that no, I'll throw them this way and then throw them a total curveball with it coming from this side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's great.
I'm sure everything was totally planned.
6 years doing it, so I've got no doubt that was in his mind.
I was going to say that I like this whole record. It doesn't bother me that, you know, there's different styles, those 3 island tracks. I'm used to it. I love the whole surprise of the whole thing. And I remember listening to the record, never hearing it before, and going from, you know, a little thing called Love, and we jump right to Computer Age, and it was a big shock, you know, because I mean, it's almost kind of cruel to start the album off with a little thing called Love. I mean, or it's funny, either one. I don't know how Neil was looking at it, but I love the whole record, and I'm with Davey on this. Hold On to Your Love. There's just something about it. It's almost like it's not totally finished. That one area, the phrasing on it, it just seems it kind of reminds me of a Beach Boys song to some degree. That's just not quite finished, you know? I think if Neil went back and worked on it some more, it'd even be better. Maybe that's what Geffen was hearing back in the day. I don't know. I'd love to hear the album that he turned in, so I hope that comes out.
Well, you can hear bootlegs, and To be honest, it was very laid back, and I think Geffen just wanted too much. I think he was expecting Neil to provide him with the harvest, when Neil has spent his whole career not doing harvest. You know, when he goes back to revisit Harvest 20 years later and has a success again with Harvest Moon, what's the next thing he does? He goes, "Oh, I don't like this," and runs to Sleeps with Angels. Couldn't be a more different album again. So every time he kind of gets too comfortable and you know, I hate the term, but boomery, you know what I mean? That middle of the road kind of thing, he intentionally goes out his way to make the next thing something completely different.
Yeah.
Spent a career doing it. He's never followed up an easy album with an easy album. It's always,
well, that's it, isn't it? I mean, he followed up Harvest with the Ditch trilogy, didn't he?
Yeah, with you know, so that's really the point, isn't it? That Geffen has no right to say that Neil, you know, what you doing, Neil, when this is the guy that in the 70s had made albums like Time Fades Away and On the Beach and Tonight's the Night, and, you know, had thrown away all those albums like Homegrown to stitch things together like Stars and Bars and blah blah blah. So yeah, I think it's more a case of Geffen was thinking he was buying somebody who could make Harvest 2 on demand, or wanted to make Harvest 2 on demand, and neither one of them is the case with Neil. He couldn't have if he wanted
They
to.
probably should have hashed that out before he got signed.
Yeah, I don't know. The $1 million would probably be enough to tempt most people to just say, whatever, Dave, where do you sign?
Yeah.
And it went bad to reprise, so all's well that ends well. But yeah, it's a shaky period, if you pardon the pun, for Neil. But, one that's well worth revisiting is the Neil Young 80s catalogue, because I don't think that, like a lot of artists, he had as bad of an 80s as the myth of the story tells us. I think a lot of classic rockers did struggle in the 80s, and I don't think Neil's one of them. I think he was still somebody who had big ideas.
Neil did what he wanted to do, and if you liked it, you liked it. It's kind of like Todd Rundgren. Todd Rundgren just did what he wanted to do, and if you liked what he did, you liked it. If you didn't, well, you didn't like it. You know. But Neil was so prolific that holy mackerel. I think it's great though. I wish he would have went down this path even further. You know, I'd love to have had another trans too, but you know.
Yeah, but again, that's not his
You're
style,
never going to get it. No.
Yeah, I mean, the closest you'll get to trans 2 is just the Berlin live concert.
Yeah.
But that's Neil for you.
But I would also give this an 8.5.
Well, there you go. It's an easy one.
But I'm basing that if Hold On to Your Love was better, more, you know, completed. I just don't think it's complete. There's just something hokey about the lyric. I don't know. And that's weird because I can't imagine Neil. I can't think of another example like this song anywhere else. Because usually all his lyrics and his everything is just always so worked out. And this just doesn't seem like it seems half-baked to me.
What it feels like to me is he, especially in the last two ones, I always thought held on to his best material when it came to CSNY. I think he gave them some stuff, but he would never give them the cream.
No.
So it sounds to me like one of the ones, because this was about the period they were supposed to do a reunion. Well, there's been about 10 different periods they were supposed to do a reunion.
There's 10 different periods.
But Neil would give them kind of, you know, put it this way, he gave them crap on American Dream, and then he comes out with Ragged Glory. You know, he gives them crap on their last one, Looking Forward, and then he comes out with Silver and Gold. So yeah, he's always been one to kind of, well, you can have some of my stuff. You know, it's a bit like yeah, you can have the fries from the side of my plate, but
right.
you can't have a bit of my burger. You know,
I can't. You know, he does like what he does.
That's the kind of track that is to me, where it just feels like a lesser Neil Young song overall.
And you know, I can't entirely blame him for that either. You know, he wants to keep his best stuff for his own work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, didn't work out for CSNY, but that was for a multitude of, well, we could go to a separate video on that. I mean, a billion different reasons. So why would you, if you think they're unreliable, which of course they were due to all sorts of addiction issues for two of the members? Why would you double down on giving anything remarkable to them? And hey, it did in the early years, because that first record it gave like Country Girl and Helpless. So
and then Ohio was a single.
Ohio was a single, although that's really a new single, isn't it? They just needed them. Yeah. It's a bit like the CSNY Deja Vu Live album and concert film. It's all Neil's Living with War album live, but CSNY are credited for it, and they adds on like Chicago and Almost Cut My Hair and For What It's Worth. So it kind of shares the limelight with them, but it's always clear when Neil's involved, it's the Neil show if he wants it to be. It's they always needed him more than he needed them. Sorry, Grant, I think you were on mute there.
Yeah, it's like it's the Neil show, but I may need your vocals, so come on. Because on Deja Vu, he can't. All those tracks were done. He just added their vocals on it. Yeah,
and American Dream, lest we forget, although it's considered one of the worst albums by major acts, CSNY's 1989 American Dream, that sold 1 million copies on the week of release. It was bigger than anything CSN had done in years or Neil had done in years. So
the public wanted that reunion.
Exactly.
They wanted.
Well, yeah, and Neil had promised to do that album after David Crosby got himself clean. So
yeah, but I mean, the album is a joke. It's easily the worst thing.
I've got it on vinyl, but I've never brought myself to play it.
Yeah, it's worse than any CSN or CSNY project. There's a couple of dodgy CSN ones in the 90s. I'm sure you remember the album
Allies.
Cover. Yeah, I'm sure Allies has got some good live stuff on it, including a brilliant Dark Star. But I'm sure you remember the album cover with the sausages in space.
Yes.
Oh yeah. What? Yeah.
That isn't even as bad as American Dream.
Oh, that's a big call.
No, because Neil's track is the actual title track is horrendous. It's got that whole Yankee Doodle kind of playing on it. I don't know what's going on there, but then Neil played it live at the Bridge Benefits, solo acoustic, and it's a brilliant track.
Yeah.
So it's again Neil being the total iconoclast. Yeah, you can have it, but we're going to release the worst version of it I can possibly make. Yeah. Bless him. He's give the people what he wants. The Kinks album name. Give the people what they deserve. Should be a Neil Young album name.
Well, was there? I don't know. I guess I'm not even gonna. I've never heard those records, and I'm just gonna stay away.
There's always good harmonies, which you expect, but the songwriting disappears. Stills as his hearing starts to go. His voice and his pitch obviously lose quite a lot of their attractions, the harmony because of that. But you still get Crosby and Nash singing like angels together.
And they still sound great. Yeah.
So yeah, and people sleep on those actually, the Crosby Nash albums, which I think they're great. Just the two of them. Just like Still's Young album doesn't get much these days at all. Just the Long May You Run aside, the rest of the album kind of gets ignored. So it's a kind of strange catalogue that Neil's got, I guess because it's so big. But there are plenty of avenues on it that just did not get explored, even though they came out in kind of eras where, as I point out to people, Time Fades Away only came out on CD standalone for the first time ever 5 months ago.
Yeah, I got it. I bought it.
Amazing. For that to have sat for 50 years, the follow-up to Harvest never released on CD. Unreal.
I don't get it.
Because Neil didn't want just didn't want it to happen. So, he's
well, he wasn't happy with it or something. What was the problem with it?
Well, I did a video on it, but to cut the longer story down, the tour was absolutely horrendous because it's one of those, people don't know, it's one of those live albums but with all new songs.
Yeah.
And the band held him up halfway through the tour and said, we want more money because we're all the crack session guys from Nashville, and he had to give in. His voice went completely because he was singing so hard every single night that he had to get Crosby and Nash in to do a lot of the high parts for the last couple of legs. And crucially, it was also the tour just after Danny Whitten died. So he was in a really bad place personally. And his favorite guitar, All Black, he didn't even use that in the tour because it was nearly got destroyed, I think in a house move or something. And that was getting repaired. So Neil plays a flying V on it, which is not a Neil Young instrument at all. So just for all sorts of reasons, I think a bit like Homegrown and Toast, both of which have been released now officially. Too personal for him at the end of the day. Too many memories. Danny Whitten.
Maybe that's what it is.
Danny Whitten should have done that, and he wasn't because of the overdose, and so it's too personal for Neil.
I'm pretty sure that's what it was. It was just too dark and personal for him at the time. He didn't want to have to go and revisit it and remaster it and all that sort of thing.
And now,
who can blame him?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the reason he ditched Toast, and because it was about his marriage dissolving with Peggy, and as we know, he left Peggy for Daryl Hannah, and then Peggy died of cancer the next year. That's a real sad ending to that story.
Yeah.
Same thing happened to Graham Nash. It's so uncanny. He left his wife for a woman who looks exactly like she did 40 years ago, a much younger woman. And his wife, Susan, died of cancer the next year as well. It's so remarkable that happened to both of them within 2 years, I think. Yeah, horrible. Just horrible for one of them to experience it, never mind both. That's the great irony of CSNY. For all the craziness, David Crosby had a 40-year happy marriage. I mean, he was the one that was the wild child of the group. So.
He went through he had his demons and he worked through them.
Yeah, but him and Jan stuck together through thick and so bless them. But hey, that's all stories for another day.
Yeah, but anyway, we'll get back on track.
Stories for another day, though, Grant, can be found in the latest record collector special.
That's right. I was going to say we have a celebrity amongst us, Bicyclelegs.
Yes. And all good newsagents now, as well as the bad ones. Features 180 pages on Neil's entire career. This photo was taken by Daryl Hannah. Isn't it amazing that Neil Young's married to Daryl Hannah? I still sometimes have to put that through my brain and go, really? Neil and Splash? What's going on?
Neil and Splash. I don't know.
So on page 64, so if I get that up, so on page 58, for example, you get a nice 2-page spread on American Stars and Bars. On page 60, you get Comes a Time, and you get some Rust Never Sleeps.
Nice.
And then after Rust Never Sleeps, you get a 2-page spread featuring me, all me. My Neil Young collection, which, part of it, I was contacted about through the Neil Young archives and asked if I wanted to be a part of this project, and it was a case of yes, please. And the guy kind of naively asked, "Can you take a picture of your Neil Young collection all facing out, covers out, so we can see the covers? And can you do it in maybe 1 or 2 pictures?" And I said, "Not unless you want it to be taken from space. No, like how many records, how many CDs, how many DVDs, how many books, how many tapes, how many Blu-rays, Also, I mean, I've got the Greendale comic book, for God's sake, I mean, it's never ending." So eventually I said, "Well, just do kind of a selection," and then he kind of picked, even that was shortened, because that's what, 4 pictures? I think it was 7 or 8 that I took. And even that was cutting out Buffalo Springfield, CSNY and things. But yeah, and then we did a full Q&A, which is pretty nifty.
Very nice.
Yeah, so I
Yes,
get
congratulations.
a page more than Stephen Stills does, and
Well, there you go.
a page and a half more than Judy Collins. So yeah, so Stills and Sweet Judy Blue Eyes herself don't add up to one me. So,
Hey, I wouldn't expect anything less.
So
That's cool. Congratulations.
thank
All
you.
right. Well, Bicycle Legs, do you have anything to follow up from that? Are you in any magazines or anything this month?
No,
Okay.
no, I'm not nearly important enough to be in magazines, unfortunately. But yeah, no, that's really great that they got Davy to do that. I think that's wonderful.
Congratulations.
I have to see. We usually get these magazines about 2-3 months later, turning up in our news agents. So I'll definitely have to keep an eye out for it and pick it
The
up.
great thing about those specials is there are plenty of them. So if people are fans of Thin Lizzy, Iron Maiden, all sorts of different bands have had specials done by Record Collect. So it's not one of those. God bless them. I love Uncut Magazine, but if I see another Bob Dylan special from them, I'll go spare. It's like, here's our annual Bob Dylan special. Yeah, so Record Collector do cater to most of the major rock acts that have got a massive following and an interesting enough record discography to kind of talk about,
Yeah.
All right. I guess we could wind this dog up. We went a little bit over an hour, but it's fine. We all give this record an 8.5. So that equals in our average an 8.5. So as you can tell from that, we would highly recommend this record, go get it.
Definitely.
Give it a shot, for crying out loud, if you hadn't heard it,
Yeah. Imagine this was featured in, what's that show that brings things back from the past and turns them into hit singles? Stranger Things. Imagine a track. Imagine Stranger Things had a track from this, and all of a sudden it became viral, and the kids got back into it.
I'd like to hear Sample and Hold on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It would fit.
That's the one I was thinking of too.
Maybe we'll see that, gentlemen. I don't know. Well, I'm hoping now that Neil has his Geffen catalog that we see some. I don't know. I just think that you should be able to do something more than What's Here with Trans. There has to be more tracks you can tag onto it. I don't know. Who knows?
Well, you seem to be a big fan of Ragged Glory. When I mentioned,
I love that. Saw that tour.
That is getting an expanded edition this year. Neil found the master tapes, and he'd forgotten that there were. I don't think it's more tracks. I think it's different versions that are longer. So there's going to be a much expanded, even more jammier version of that album. Which, if anybody doesn't know, that's the jammiest of jams you can possibly get on that record. So an even longer version of Love and Only Love.
Psychedelic Pill's pretty jammy.
Psychedelic Pill, I always say, is the last recognizably Crazy Horse-like album. Because the new Crazy Horse have got Niels Lofgren back, and they're back to a more country-ish sound.
That's fine.
Whereas when Pancho was in the band for all those decades, when you knew Pancho was coming on stage, it was just going to be a loud mess sometimes. But
well, I saw that Ragged Glory tour. I think that was 91. Social Distortion opened. Then it was Sonic Youth. And then Neil. And Neil was just as noisy. He fit right in. It was absolutely one of my favorite concerts I'd ever been to. It was phenomenal. Sonic Youth was phenomenal. And, to have Social Distortion open up, it was just, they sounded great. It was a great show. Well worth the drive.
There's a reason they call Neil Young the godfather of grunge.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, 1978, how heavy is Hey Hey My My? It's just
exactly
unreal. And again, that is one that will blow your speakers if you didn't.
It will. And people never really mention how heavy that is.
Crunchy.
I mean, it's absolutely fabulous. Of course, I think Rust Never Sleeps that's one of my all-time favorite Neil albums on the planet. I think it's just a perfect record.
One of my favorite tracks of all time is on it, Powderfinger.
Yeah. I even like the version that, what was it on? Homegrown? I
Yeah.
like that version too. I love that track. What a great song. Holy crap.
Again,
Oh,
with that-
sampling holds right up there with Powderfinger.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't tend to think of him as a songs. You know, I put it this way: I never listened to Neil Young songs. I always listen to Neil Young albums. But
Yeah.
if I had to pick a Neil Young song to be my favorite, it would be "Ambulance Blues," the closer from "On the Beach." It's just him on acoustic and harmonica, and Rusty Kershaw on fiddle.
Mhm.
Just breathtaking. But that's my favorite Neil Young album, "On the Beach."
Oh, it is? I didn't know that.
I think it's perfect from start to finish.
Mm.
And it's funny that Bicycle, you mentioned the George Harrison kind of slide sound.
Yeah.
Because that's also on there on the beach with the opener of Walk On. It's got a very kind of
Yeah.
similar
Yeah, it
sound.
does.
More ragged, but hey.
Yeah, I've got a copy of On the Beach, but I think it was a cutout. When that came out, at least here in the States, I don't think it really did anything.
No, it didn't, and that didn't come out in CD until 2004.
Mm-hmm.
That was another one that Neil vetoed, and not because it was too personal, just because he didn't, he had this kind of a period where he went through an embarrassment about certain albums flopping, and he didn't want them released and things. So it took a while for all his catalog to come out. Well,
But also On the Beach is one of those records that people look back on it and they're much more fonder of it now. It's grown, it's been out there.
absolutely.
Some people love that record.
And a track like Revolution Blues is as heavy as Neil gets in that period, and it's not even Crazy Horse. It's him on guitar, and it's Levon from the band and Rick from the band on the rhythm section, drums and bass, obviously. And they're as heavy as Crazy Horse. Absolutely sensational.
Yeah, but On the Beach is probably my favorite of that period.
Yeah, it's my favorite overall, but I think he's such a great artist that you could have different. You're right. You can divide them into periods or just styles almost. Like this is my more laid back Neil. This is my favorite heavy Neil. This is my favorite out there Neil. So yeah. There's almost different discographies you can put him in.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's wind this one up, I guess. We've had a great discussion, boys. I'm just saying, we've covered a lot of different, it's almost a Neil Young special, You have the Neil Young magazine special. This is the
this is the
Grant Rock Warehouse special.
This is the spin-off.
All right. I want to thank the gentlemen. Thanks, Davey. Thanks, Bicyclelegs, for coming on. Please leave a comment down below. Please like, subscribe. Check out these gentlemen's channels. Subscribe to those if you haven't. Check out Davey's article in the Neil Young Rock Collector Special magazine, wherever you can find it. God knows it's hard to find magazines here in the States, but check it out. Other than that, gentlemen, I appreciate you coming on. This was a lot of fun.
No, thanks for having us. This was
fun. Thanks for having us.
I like talking Neil. I don't think I've talked Neil on anything yet.
I've only done 40 videos on him.
Well, I know you have, but here in the warehouse, we have it.
Listen, you've got a lot to cover because your style of music is music. So you've got a rather broad spectrum.
Yeah. Oh well, it is what it is.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. We'll see you, and I appreciate it. And if I only knew how to turn this off.